Bienvenidos a Teología sin Vergüenza, teología queer feminista que hace fluir la justicia.
¿Cuántas personas cristianas conoces tú que viven sin vergüenza, como queer y o feministas? Casi no se escucha de nosotros, pero sí existimos.
Estamos por todas partes, luchando en la academia, en las iglesias, en las casas y en las calles. Luchamos por nuestras comunidades y por nuestras propias vidas.
No somos machos, pero somos muchas.
Somos queer feministas sin vergüenza de tener fe. Somos teólogas sin vergüenza de ser activistas. Somos las sinvergüenzas.
Le sacamos el jugo a la Biblia para producir teología queer feminista que refresque la lucha y haga venir la justicia.
En cada episodio encontrarás teología bien jugosa, como agua de papaya.
¡Chúpetela!
Hola sinvergüenzas, bienvenidos a este nuevo episodio de esta temporada de Teología sin Vergüenza en inglés. Nos da mucho gusto que estén aquí. En esta ocasión, Alba entrevistó a Belén Morales. Ella es una parte bien importante de Soulforce y es una persona brillante que creo que tiene una claridad espiritual y política muy bella. Y es increíble escucharla. Hablaron, ni siquiera sé muy bien por dónde empezar, hablaron sobre lo que está sucediendo con la crisis de derechos humanos en Estados Unidos, con ICE, hablaron sobre dejar espacios sectarios y reconstruir tu fe, hablaron sobre anarquía, sobre sionismo, hablaron sobre por qué o sea, hablaron del apocalipsis, hablaron sobre qué tiene que decir la teología hoy, o sea, por qué es relevante. Muchas
Hablamos
cosas.
de los cuerpos, las cuerpas y qué significa ser cristiana y cómo nos enseña a desconfiar de nosotros mismos y nuestros conocimientos, cuerpos, reacciones. Entonces es muy lindo escuchar su camino de regresar o recuperar esta confianza en sí misma para entender qué es lo mejor para ella.
Y que algo que a mí me gustó mucho y quienes me conocen sabrán que yo me identifico mucho con Belén, con esta forma de acceder a sanidad a través de leer y estudiar y entender teología, ¿no? No es el único camino y muchas otras personas llegan a través de muchos otros lugares, pero creo que Belén y yo compartimos esta cosa como de querer saber por qué, ¿no? Esta curiosidad y que nos llevó a estudiar la historia de la iglesia, que nos llevó a estudiar los porqués, por qué la Biblia dice lo que dice, quién lo decidió así. Y uno pensaría, bueno, está esta narrativa de que cuando te metes ahí tu fe se hace más débil, pero al contrario, ¿no? O sea, tu fe se transforma, se fortalece y también creo que es interesante, me gustó mucho escucharla hablar de cómo llevar esos aprendizajes y conocimientos al cuerpo de una forma más encarnada, ¿no? Y viva, ¿no? Y no solo como algo intelectual.
Exacto. Y una cosa que me encanta también es que algunos episodios de Teología sin Vergüenza van muy rápidos y estamos hablando rápido y casi no hay momento para respirar entre las conversaciones, y otros que van mucho más con intención y lento, mucha reflexión. Esto es uno para las personas que nos están escuchando, eso es uno de los que van súper, hiper rápido. Entonces, es uno de esas que tiene que ponerte atención para captar todo lo que está compartiendo porque tiene tanta sabiduría. Belén, estamos muy agradecidos por tenerla con nosotras y por tener este episodio.
Sí, esperemos que les guste mucho. Si tienen algún comentario, duda, aclaración, nos pueden escribir en nuestras redes sociales @teosinvergüenza o por correo a teosinvergüenza@soulforce.org.
Disfruten.
Disfruten.
Hi, Belén. Welcome
So good
to
to be here.
Sin Vergüenza. I'm so glad to have you. I've been wanting to have an episode with you for seasons and seasons. So I'm like, yes, we finally got it. I'm so glad.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, let's start with the same question as always. Do you identify as a sinvergüenza? Why or why not? And because we're in English this season and folks who don't have access to Spanish might not know the word sinvergüenza, if you can tell us, like, what does that word mean to you? Do you have any experience with it growing up? Anything about your sinvergüenzura and how you identify would be awesome.
Yes, so I heard vergüenza a lot growing up, always in a negative context. And so what it means to me is one without shame. And
Mhm.
growing up as an evangelical in the independent fundamentalist Baptist world, shame, you had to have shame. Being a human was being,
Mm,
just being fully human was of shame. Being a
mm,
sinful human was shame. To be human
mm,
was to be sinful and to be distant from God. So I heard sinvergüenza a lot. Externally too, I grew up in the Bay Area. My church was in the middle of the Mission District in San Francisco. So, seeing people del mundo of the world, there are a bunch of sinvergüenzas. And to me now, it's such a powerful term. I'm so grateful that there's been this reclamation that's been led from Del Sinvergüenza around the word itself, because I do live without shame, and I think that's a divine gift. And we could talk about more of what that means later, but yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Yes, yes, sinvergüenza. And I do feel like there are these times where we can reclaim those things that were used against us in ways that feel powerful. And I'm grateful for all of our community who has kind of leaned in, and we have folks who may identify with one piece of our queer feminist theology or a different piece, and it's like a wide umbrella. But what we have in common is like almost all of us have a very lived and real experience with this sinvergüenzura and doing the shedding of shame. And one of the things talking about growing up where you did, I also grew up in a very like progressive place in Asheville, North Carolina. And I remember that growing up, I had no idea that I lived in a liberal place. Like no clue that we had had like a lesbian mayor when I was growing up, because my community was a community of like white Appalachian mountain folk who had been there for generations and generations. And my entire life was centered around church. And so it was hyper conservative and fundamentalist, but I had no idea because I was so insulated. I couldn't even read like the community outside of that insulation. And so you talking about growing up in a fundamentalist context, but in San Francisco, I'm like, tell us a little bit about that experience because I know we have that in common. And do you have a moment where you were like, oh, thinking back, you can see that intersection?
Yeah, and I'm totally with you. I was so disconnected from that world, from, queerness, from even like radical political thought, right? I grew up
Mm,
in my church was in San Francisco, but I grew up in Oakland. I didn't know who the Black Panthers were until I was in college. And I was
what?
so, which is so crazy to think about now, or so like it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does make sense because that's a project of fundamentalism, the patriarchy, is to cut you off from your roots. And
Right.
that means a million different things. But yeah, my world was so small. Growing
Yeah.
up, immigrant family, it was an immigrant church, and my whole social life was the church. I wasn't allowed to really do anything but go to church, after school activities, even having like going over to people's houses, friends from school, like that was like a hard no, because everything revolved around the church. And so, yeah, my only relationship to like my geographic location was like this was they were bad and evil and going to hell,
Hmm.
and we were like the shining light on top of the hill, salt of the earth,
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
wasn't even like a we have to go save them. I think there was partly that, but it was almost like they are loving their sin. This is like a hopeless campaign with them. We need to minister to other people because they clearly want to go to hell.
Yes.
And the biggest kind of interaction I remember having, I have a really vivid memory of. I was probably like 7 or 8, and there was a bookstore right next to the church. And on Sundays, we were there for like all day. And so when we had a break between services, we'd go to the bookstore, we'd go whatever. And so I was there. I think I was with a parent, with one of my parents, I'm pretty sure. And I remember being at the bookstore, we're about to buy something. And then I look over and there is like the LGBT section and a rainbow, and my eyes just kind of went big. And I literally remember whatever adult I was with just like putting their hand over my eyes and like turning me away. And that was just such a like encapsulation of my childhood in the church and being in San Francisco.
That feels like such an important metaphor for literally so many things. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about your experience of becoming politicized and coming into your queerness. And I think that folks assume, like, if you're from somewhere like San Francisco or Oakland, if you're from a big city, then of course you will have had this very, like, connected understanding of how the world works and the real world and, you know, those kinds of things. But I think the church is a perfect example of how some of us are so insulated that it takes us a long time to get words and get frameworks to make sense of the world outside of that church world. And so it makes sense to me that we often are like complicit in our own small worldness, because that's the logic that we have been instilled with. And so that process, I think, is so important for people to know. One, it's never too late. And two, it is a process and you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be like the most, like, have all the history memorized and repeatable to be welcome in our community. And that is about us telling our stories of like, how do we come into consciousness? Because I was surrounded in an almost all white environment. And so the logics of white supremacy and stuff just were what was true. But it took like, I was well into college, out of college in my 20s, like before I even connect dots like racism and xenophobia and things like that. So tell us about your experience.
Oof, where do I even start? Because it was a journey, friend.
Yes.
It was a journey. It took me so long. And yeah, I've had to do like work in therapy around like, it's okay that it took me a long time because how I grew
Yeah.
up. I was so instilled with white supremacy, patriarchy, all of the things that were like the DNA of the independent fundamentalist Baptist movement, which was started by Jack Hyles, who was one of the less successful religious right um, founders from the 80s. And
Maybe tell us a
so
little bit more about them, because maybe
yeah,
folks don't know about that church.
yeah. So the independent fundamentalist Baptist movement started in the 80s, maybe the 70s, but it kind of rose with prominence with the religious right. And so
Yeah.
it is very, I think what sets them aside from a lot of conservative evangelicals is their acute hatred of women. Like the
Mm,
misogyny was really, really intense. And I know misogyny is intense in a lot of denominations, but it was
yeah.
very much about like it was centered around the submissiveness of women and
Mm-hmm.
really and this is why it took me so long to come into my queerness, like the inherent untrustworthiness, how inherently untrusty women were.
Yeah.
From the really like blaming all of human sin on Eve,
Yeah.
and so forth, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that's where, and then just like the rest of it, like I didn't know white people growing up. I grew up in Oakland
Mm,
in the 90s, in Fruitville. There weren't a lot of white people around, same in the Mission in San Francisco. But like the way that this church upheld white supremacy because of the theological beliefs, like all of them did. It was also very
wow.
Republican because a lot of folks in the church had what's the word, amnesty, immigration amnesty, because under the Reagan presidency. Of course, what they didn't have the political education to know is that all the issues in their countries of origin were because of American policies, but
Yeah.
they didn't have the education to put that together.
Right.
So all that being said, it was I grew up in that church till I was about 15, had family dynamics, moved away from that church. And then there is a lot of what I thought, looking back, kind of lateral moves, but maybe like 0.2% more progressive moves that I had to make
That
to get to
counts.
where I am
Every
now.
bit
Yeah,
counts.
and that's what I needed. I couldn't do it all at once. Like it
Right.
was just impossible for me to get there because there was so much undoing I had to do. I had to undo, number one, the misogyny was so
Mm-hmm.
intense. Like I didn't trust myself, right?
Yes.
I had to undo of course, the white supremacy, the patriarchy, the need for like the belief that I needed like a man around,
Mm.
um, and that men like held systems together, and that they were inherently trustworthy, that they were inherent leaders. And which made no sense, right? Because we got this from the pulpit, but in my realities, the men were like completely inutilist. Like they didn't know how to, do anything. They couldn't even wash a dish, cook a meal, take care of the kids. Like the women did all of the things, even like put church stuff together, right? And so there was just so much cognitive dissonance with what I was preached about. And I was in the church like 3 times a week. Like it was intense, right? Like, or 2 times a week, but like all day on Sundays. It was my life. It was like the indoctrination, like it was so intense. And so then I went to a non-denominational white church, which non-denominational, in my opinion, is kind of like Baptist light. So I went from like God being super scary. I was afraid all the time. My nervous system was totally rattled like all the time because God was always watching me, like the elf on the shelf guy. And then going to
like Santa,
literally, but like bad Santa. And then going to like this white church that was more Jesus is your buddy. Jesus, and they still had conservative beliefs, right? It's still at the end of the day were homophobic and patriarchal, but it was a different framework of like Jesus cares about you, like actually cares about you, and you don't have to be afraid to talk to Jesus. It was very much about like personal relationship with Jesus. I grew up with more of like a fearful top-down relationship with God, so it like morphed, right? And then in high school, I was super nerdy. I was like a religious history nerd. I was reading like Karen Armstrong and like just like histories of the church, because I grew up believing and being taught that God just dropped the Bible from heaven and God wrote it, pulled up Google Docs.
English.
In English. No, in Spanish, actually.
Well, okay.
And that was it, And so it was so mind-blowing to me to just learn about the history of the Bible, how the Bible came to be, who decided what was in the Bible. And from then on, I was like 16, 17 reading this stuff, right? And from then on, like, it was very much a Pauline experience of like scales falling from my eyes, starting to really see like, whoa, like what I was kind of right as a kid. Like I did believe in God and there was something to this God thing, but like those men had it so wrong. And from then I kind of I left that church for different reasons. And I went to another church that was another white church. It was an evangelical covenant church. That was a very much a lateral move from the prior one. I thought it was a little bit more open and accepting. They weren't. But at that point, I had started grad school. So I did my undergrad in biblical studies at a Pentecostal university founded by a woman, which as a kid, that would have been like super progressive.
Yes,
like
radical.
Is, like really nuts to think about. That would be like radical because it was founded by a woman. And that was something the IBF definitely didn't. Or IFB didn't agree with at all. And it was still super conservative. It was Pentecostal, right? But I did my undergrad in biblical studies that was really illuminating. And then I did my master's in theology at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. So it was really an interesting shift because my undergrad was like a very brown and black school with really conservative theology. And then my grad school was a very white school with a lot more liberal progressive theology. So it was kind of like it was a lot of learning, a lot of unlearning, but it wasn't until really after grad school that I had more of like a racial consciousness. I think grad school really helped me open up my mind to there are many ways to be a Christian. The rapture started the belief about the rapture started like 300 years ago. Like ain't nobody believed that, and it's like uniquely American too.
Wait. So, tell us a little bit more before you continue, because some people hearing this show. No, I love it. This is exactly what we're here for. But I want to put an exclamation point in that, because for sure there will be people on this podcast who are hearing that the rapture is not like in Jesus' mouth from 1,000 million years ago, before even Jesus showed up in the scripture and prophecy. Like, this is going to be an exclamation point. So I want to pause so you can tell us a little bit more, because rapture, I don't know how you were growing up, but I swear every time I came in the house and my grandmother wasn't there and I expected her to be there, the first thing out of my brain was like, oh my God, rapture happened and I've been left behind. Also the Left Behind series. Messed up.
So messed up. Yeah. They rolled in the TV at my church so we could watch Left Behind. That was the only movie we're allowed to watch there.
So
my first
rapture.
anxiety attack. Yeah. my first anxiety attacks were about the rapture. Like I was super
Makes
young
sense.
and I would check in on my mom's room to see if my dad was there. I'd be like, maybe he did get left behind. But if my mom wasn't there, I'd freak out. So yeah, I learned through school and through historical study of Christianity that so many of the things that evangelicals like propped up today as having like been true always, like the rapture, like Zionism, the state
Mm-hmm.
of Israel. These things happened in very recent memory and very uniquely American too, which is what
Mm.
also tripped me up. If you go to like other countries, the rapture theology really isn't as much like prominent and so central to so much evangelical belief. I was really into like the study of the end times when I was in
Mm-hmm.
college, eschatology, it's also called.
Yeah.
And, reading like the scripture around the rapture, like it just had no historical precedence. And it really gained traction after around the Great Awakening, which was after the Enlightenment. It was like kind of the
Wow.
religious like backlash to
Mm-hmm.
scientific discovery. It's because they felt like they were losing control like in the public square and losing
Wow.
control of people. And
Wow.
usually these fear tactics, like the invention of hell, the invention of the rapture, are used to control people for power, for money. I mean, all the usual hits.
Yep.
Um, and so really, really learning Christian history saved me.
Yes.
Because it was like the church has not always looked like this. The church has looked like all kinds of people and queer
Yeah.
people. We've always been
Yes.
here. We are the church. And so I had
That's
spent so
right.
much of my undergrad and in these churches arguing about um, can gays be Christian and like those conversations. And then I had this aha moment, towards the undergrad school of like, of course we can. Like this conversation is so silly. We've always been here.
Yeah.
We are not only do we belong at the table, like we are the table.
Hell yeah.
And so that so I kind of had a little bit more of like my queer awakening before even like my racial consciousness, which really honestly didn't happen until Black Lives Matter movement started.
Mm.
And then I was able to connect the dots because I started reading James Cone,
Okay.
God of the Oppressed. I started
Mm.
reading the Mujerista theologies, and then they all came together for me. And then the
Yes.
New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, like all todo tiene que ver. It's all connected.
Yep.
And yeah, and that took a long time. I was in my late 20s
Totally.
when most of this happened. So yeah, that's kind of how I got there.
Amazing. I know it feels late, but I don't think it is late. Like we
Mm,
each of us who are willing to do the work go on a journey, and that journey takes us all over the place. And so I just do believe like we do figure it out as soon as we can. And it's the unwillingness to try that makes us, that's the late part, is the like closed-heartedness to things that we feel in our bodies and our dissonance. I want to go back to this self-trust thing because I
mm,
think that like demonization of our flesh, and particularly female flesh, like assigned female, trans female, it doesn't matter, but it's the femininity that has to be, just squashed out of us and seen as something that not only isn't valid and we shouldn't listen to, but something really dangerous. Like we are supposed to kill all of those pieces within us that tell us no or yes. And then once that is sufficiently, squashed down, then we can rely on our external brothers, fathers, priests, preachers, whatever, to guide us in what is true about our own bodies, our own lives, all of those things. So I know you to be somebody who has worked really hard on that self-trust. And I'm curious if you will tell us a little bit about like how you map that arc of trusting your body and trusting yourself, and like what happened that made you be able to do that, because I know so many folks who are searching for that path to come back to themselves once they know they
mm,
need to, but how do we do
yeah.
that process? So how was that for you?
Oh, it's such a long process and one that I'm still on. I don't think that journey's
Yeah.
ever really complete when you grow up, like we grew up.
Yeah.
And so it was a really long process. I think, one of the first big lessons I was taught as a kid was like, Jesus is God, number one, right? And number two
Mm-hmm.
is like, you are the worst.
Yeah.
Like you are inherently sinful.
You deserve hell.
as a baby, you deserve hell if only by the grace of God that you're here.
Yes.
And so it took me a really long time. I was able to like dismantle so much of like the oppressive theologies, the neo theologies, like I mentioned around the rapture, through
Mm-hmm.
kind of my study of Christian history. But like the
Yeah.
self part was really hard, and even in
Yeah.
college, I was like, maybe I am and should be asexual.
Yeah.
Because I was reading like the first Christians, like they even believe in marriage or sex or anything, and there
Yep.
was like this really separation from flesh from spirit, because like if you
Yep.
read certain passages in the Bible, it's like very like flesh is no good. And it's also a really Gnostic understanding. Like some of the early Gnostic Christians were very much like it's all about your spirit, forget the body, forget the body, forget the body. And so in grad school, I started thinking about more of the body.
Mm.
And I took some theologies of dance classes. I love
Mm.
love a liberal seminary. And like and doing more embodiment practices. I was also in therapy at that point. So doing more
Yep.
embodiment practices, and it was so uncomfortable for me. Really, really
Yeah.
uncomfortable for me. And
Because
so
no
it took a
dancing
while.
growing up.
No dancing.
Yeah.
I grew up in Footloose, like truly, like no dancing, certainly no red cowboy boots, like nada. So we would have secret dance parties, like for real. It was like literally Footloose. It's nuts.
Yes.
So yeah, so it took some time for me to come into myself, and I think that had to do with like not trusting myself. One of the first things that cults do is they tear down your sense of self. They tear down the
Yes.
individual
Yeah.
completely, like down to the nubs, or even beyond, so that they
Yeah.
can rebuild you with only within like the community or the group.
Yeah.
And so I felt like that happened to me really acutely in every church community that I was a part of until
Mm.
like my mid 20s. I mean, I had, leaders even telling me like, you don't know yourself. We know
Mm.
you. We will tell you what's right for you.
Mm. Mm.
And yeah, and so it wasn't until I started reading more, feminist, uh, like Black scholars, and really like learned about like, and who is it? Oh, I'm seeing her name, Zora Neale Hurston, that says that talked about how, they will rewrite your story. I'm gonna butcher the
Yes.
quote, but like they're gonna rewrite your story and say that, your life was great, everything was great, even though that's not your story. And so a lot of
Yes.
people were writing my stories. And so
Mm.
um yeah, so from then on, I really had to work, and thank God for therapy. Shout out to Christine, my
Yes.
therapist, on like rebuilding that sense of self, that trust.
Yes.
And it took a really long time, and I've grown leaps and bounds around it. And I've gotten older. I'm almost 40. I think I've made peace with a lot more of it, and really forgiving myself for those times I haven't trusted myself.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's kind of, so it was through more study, through reading women's stories, queer people's stories, and to like really take my power back. And that's also like a therapy thing, right? It's like taking your power
Yes.
back, having your own agency. And I think that was probably one of the biggest hurdles I had to overcome.
Yeah.
Even before like the racial consciousness, queer consciousness, coming out to myself, and then others. Coming out to myself was way harder, but that was like kind of the first thing was like having to, or the hardest thing rather. It was like the trust in myself, the trust my own narrative,
Yes.
without apology.
Yeah, and if we trust ourselves, it opens the doors to so many other possibilities, like creating our own possibilities for future, like choosing our own lives, like
Yeah,
creating different ways of doing family, of doing life, of doing work.
yeah,
Like there's so much that is behind that door. And I think that's why, I mean, Audre Lorde taught us about that erotic, the yes, whether it's sexual or
yes,
not sexual, but the
exactly.
yes and the no, how powerful that is, and therefore why it has to be so demonized. And I think it's like the farther we have to come, the longer that is, because if you started repressing what you knew to be true about what you wanted for your body and your life when you were born, basically, then that's a long journey. And I think we need to give ourselves so much credit and permission to be on that journey. All of us who are listening, like, we encourage therapy. We encourage all of those things that we do to try to recover that, because it feels like it has literally been stolen from us, and it is so powerful, and it is ours. Like, it is our birthright. It is our divine gift. So I just feel like we can't talk about it enough.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things too that I meant to say was about I mean, going back to the Bible, like Jesus became flesh. Like the flesh is
Yes.
important and it's central and it's good. And
Yes.
I think that was one of the things that was absolutely, probably on purpose missing from like my childhood religion, was that the body is good. If it wasn't, why would Jesus
Yes.
become flesh? What was the point of incarnation?
Yes.
And so I think like having that in my therapy, like when my therapist says, pull in all your resources, like therapy and somatic, practices and things like that,
Yes.
really helped me to come into my own sexuality, and pleasure and desire, like you mentioned, because I just felt like I wasn't supposed to have any, and I
Yes.
strived to not have any, for a long
Yes.
time.
Yes. And I want to just let that breathe for a second, because it's so critically important. And that was the same, like, Jesus was fully human and fully God, but we mostly just talked about the fully God part. And we never talked about any of the fully flesh part, unless it was like, Jesus was bleeding on the cross, or like the suffering of Jesus was the human part, but not all the rest of Jesus. And I think that that
Yeah.
concept of like enfleshment was the connector piece that I needed between theology and social justice, because I was also taught,
Mm,
like, we don't get involved with that messy politics stuff, because that's of the earth, and that's princes, like principalities, and that we just, like, we save ourselves for heaven, and we build up our gifts for the afterlife, and we keep to ourselves over here because the world already hates us and everybody's going to hell anyway. I mean, like you
yep,
were saying
same.
earlier, I was like, the Methodists across the way were going to hell. Forget the Catholics and forget
Oh
people
gosh,
of
the
other
Catholics. That,
religions,
oh
right?
my gosh, yeah, way off. Yeah. Hmm.
Just like the conservative Methodists were going to hell. So it was just like,
Yeah.
so I think all of that connection of, like, it took me longer to connect theology and Bible and Christianity with social justice, because I thought that that was like sullying my spirit and my hands. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until I got a better Christology around, God
Mm,
clearly cares about the flesh and the human condition now on this earth, in
yeah.
these bodies,
Yep.
not as something that should just be punished and discarded and disciplined. We use
Yeah.
that word a lot, discipline the body,
Yeah.
but something that we should actually care about, which means we care about social justice issues, which means we care about people. That also, the Bible has, there's a ton of backup for it, but somehow I
So
just skipped
much.
over that.
So much. Yeah. It's and that one, and it's always overlooked. Same. Like we were never supposed to care about, the poor. I mean, probably a lot of us were poor at the church, but
Yeah.
that wasn't something that like, like there wasn't like a, hey, let's everybody gather and make sure there's enough food for everybody. That's not something that we did. Even
Yeah.
though the first Christians did, and like they were really concerned about, like social justice, and that's all throughout the prophets in the
Yeah.
Hebrew Bible, and that's also in some of the Pauline letters, and certainly in what Jesus was talking about. Even just like in part of the Lord's Prayer is giving us our daily bread. Like that is like like a need of the
Flesh.
flesh on the
Yes.
daily.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, it's just, and that was absolutely overlooked because I think it opens a can of worms, right?
Totally.
Like you start looking at inequality outside, you start looking at inequality inside, and church people don't want you to do that.
Yeah, it was wild. Like, we would go on mission trips. Like, okay, so one, I grew up in a very poor church, like all poor white folk. And we did help each other, but it was like a personal, like, we helped sister so and so or whatever. Even if it was like an abusive husband, it wasn't the marriage that was the problem or the relationship. It was about the devil, and it was about like the spiritual support. And we would provide, like, I remember
Mm,
church ladies, like, providing food. But then when we were talking about the world, it was always like mission trips to faraway places, even within Appalachia, but it was like a poor them and we're being good by helping them. But it was always conditioned, whatever benefit we were doing, whether it was helping rebuild houses or whatever, was directly predicated on people coming to the worship services.
Yep.
And we would count souls that we converted in exchange for these very basic things like shoes for kids and like putting roofs on trailers. Like it was basic human need. And it was, but it never felt like we were giving it freely. It felt like it was a very transactional, you come to these revival services. Some of your kids, some of your adults are going to give their lives to Jesus Christ. And in exchange, we will bless you by working on your house or your mother's trailer or whatever. And now looking at it from this side, I'm like, oh, I so see it as an economic exchange rather than this like Christian morality, because good works were sinful. Like it wasn't, we weren't supposed to be about works.
Right.
We were supposed to be about faith.
Yeah.
So yeah,
James be damned. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So
Book of the Bible for those following along at home. Yeah.
So I just
Faith
think
without works
about
is
that.
dead is highly controversial. Yeah,
Right.
no. I think because their God was transactional, so we had to be transactional, right? Their
Yeah.
God was angry, so they were angry. Their God was oppressive, so they were oppressive. And I think it's a
Yeah.
direct reflection of, and somebody said it once, like we build God in our image.
Mm.
Instead of the reverse. And so, yeah, I think all of those, like, because we didn't do missions in my childhood church, but later in the evangelical church, the white evangelical churches I went to, we went on missions and to Mexico. Usually, it was really kind of a trip being there as like being Mexican
Mm.
in Mexico, doing like
Mm.
missions work with these white folks and like
Wow.
putting on church services and having to translate. It was very strange.
God.
Very,
Oh,
very intense.
friend.
I was like 17, like, ugh.
Yes.
But yeah, it's like, it has to be that's like, and then I think it also like is part of capitalism, right? Like this like model of like relationships only being transactional. Like we are
Yeah.
going to give you something in order and then that makes a contract that you have to do this. You have to be saved. You have to, come to the church service. And same like with their version of God, right? Like I'm going to be pious and not swear and not gamble in order for you to bless me in my life. Or like not even bless you in your life, but like so I can have, treasures in heaven.
Yeah.
It is such a transactional model that really distorts what love is and what, a relationship with spirituality, God, the divine can look like.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you will talk to us a little bit more about, growing up in a predominantly Black and brown community and church, but having theology that is white supremacist, because that is going to bridge us to the next conversation I really want to talk about, which is what's happening with our community these days and who these ICE people are who are
Yes.
acting as terrorists on behalf of the state. And I think that how you connect those dots is so critically important. So will you tell us a little bit about your experience and how you see that connecting to this political moment?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for bringing that up. So, so we didn't ever talk about white people in church. It wasn't something we talked about. I saw the
Yeah.
white people on TV, like Saved by the Bell. I thought those were all white people, like live like that. Like Steve Martin and Father the Bride was very formative to me. I was like, oh, all white people have these kinds of houses and these kinds of lives, right? And so, we never talked in the home. And also, like, my parents were immigrants. They came here in the
Yeah.
80s. So they didn't know about white culture like that. I mean, besides what they saw on TV as well. So we never talked about white people, both in the church or at home. And so I had really no semblance of like what it was. If you told me, as a kid that I was in a white supremacist church, I'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. But
Right.
it really was so exemplifying that white supremacy does not need only white people to uphold white supremacy. And I think this was mostly a cue in the politics of it all. So it was very, like I said, it was immigrant church, very Republican, Reagan. It was very much like America saved us from our countries. We come to America because it's the land of milk and honey. It's the promised land, where we have opportunity. I mean, my dad was from El Salvador. He fled the Civil War, right? So there's like this refugee mentality. Again, not knowing that American intervention was the, seed of that war. So it was very much like thinking of America as a very like salvific saving entity. And so we have the American flag. We would do the Pledge of Allegiance at church. All these brown people doing the Pledge of Allegiance.
Woo.
The idolatry jumps out.
On the altar. Did you have the American flag on one side and the Christian flag on the other? And the Christian flag, yes.
Absolutely. And so it was a very and my dad was very Republican. I don't really remember my mom talking about America like that, but it was just in the air that we breathed. I didn't think twice about it, and of course I did the Pledge of Allegiance at school as well. But it was like this veneration of America and of the colonizer. And so it was like, our countries of origin like matter. There's still pride in like being Mexican, Central, Salvadoran, Nicaragua, and all the like, but there was also this acute pride in being American, whether they were like documented or not. Like there is like this pride in being American. And like one of the and I was just thinking about this the other day. One of like the main career paths that was celebrated at church for the men was military service. Like one of the jóvenes, as we were called, the jóvenes, of my generation, went to the Air Force, and everybody was like, wow, like you couldn't be spending your time doing anything better. Of course, women were not encouraged to go to anything except for like the Jack Hyles Bible School in Indiana. That was like, but only for like a summer program. Like, don't really get a degree. You don't need it.
So we could, so you could like teach the children, right?
Right. Just to teach other women and the children.
Yes.
And so the American patriotism, was wrapped up in all of this in a way that I didn't realize was so problematic till later. And then now, connecting to the current moment, and this is true, I think, in a lot of evangelical circles. I don't think the Catholics do the whole American thing as much, or at least the Mexican Catholics, from my understanding. But like the evangelicals love America so much, and it makes sense, right? Because evangelicalism is also like very acutely American. Like I talked about the rapture; these are really and Zionism, like these are really American ideologies that were made more prolific because of the church.
Exported with money and Bible study and sermon seeds. Absolutely. Not 100%. Organic.
Yeah. And I mean, Zionism was also in the air that we breathe, the state of it. I didn't really get it like as a kid, of course, but I mean, we had like Mexicans and Nicaraguenses walking around with like the Star of David, like what? Like, and they were like judío por herencia, like Jewish by like, ancestral heritage. And again, it didn't make any sense to me. I didn't understand we read about Jewish people, of course, in the Hebrew Bible, but like those dots never connected for me as a kid. But that's what's taught in so many evangelical churches, which is like they're so prominent all across America. And so it is not surprising to me to see so many Latina people, or Hispanic people as they prefer to be called, as ICE agents. And I say Hispanic because that is the word that the colonizers gave us. Yes. It is the people who have been colonized by Spain, and folks find a lot of pride in that.
So you weren't surprised when people have been unveiling Border Patrol and ICE agents that those were our people under those masks?
100%. I was not surprised. Disgusted always, but not surprised because of one, the military industrial complex is always going to prey on vulnerable Black and brown people. 100%.
Yes.
Like they need poor Black and brown people to fight their wars. That has been true since the American Revolution. It was true in Vietnam. It's true now. And now their war is, of course, around the world with all their secret wars and whatnot, but also like the wars that they're waging on people here in the United States. So of course they're getting the signing bonuses, like all of these things, like just like how the military prays and does recruitment at
High
low income
schools.
high schools. It's the
Yes.
same spirit there. And we have a sincere lack of political education for nuestra gente. Like I said,
Yes.
I didn't know about the Black Panthers till I was in college because I took an African American history class, and I was in
Mm.
Oakland, California for my whole
Yes.
life.
Yes.
And so there is such a lack of political education for our people that's accessible. And this is why we have all these people upholding white supremacy, because they will be happy to sell out their communities. And like people selling out their own communities for the sake of empire is also as old as empire. This has
Yes.
always happened and is a strategy of the empire, is to create certain pathways to success for
Yep.
certain people of the marginalized group so they can help control the marginalized group, and so that they have this fantasy that those select few will be part of the reigning class, but they will never be. They will absolutely
Right.
never be white
Yes.
in the way that they think that they are white because they're making $300,000 a year.
Yes.
Your last name is still Nunez, honey. Like you will get beat by the police. Sorry, even if you're in a
Yes.
shitty Tesla. Can we
Yes.
swear? Sorry.
Yes, you can swear.
Okay, cool.
It's a really
Okay, good.
interesting.
Yeah.
I want to just connect those dots to make sure for our audience, because I do think there's a lot of people who do not understand what the hell is going on. And so
Mm,
I think it's important to connect those dots really explicitly, because I think political education is so critically important, and we have prioritized like assimilation, being good, work, all of those
yes.
things over those kinds of community education. So basically what you're saying is connecting the dots between why would people from our own communities, children of immigrants, first gen, second gen, sometimes immigrants themselves, why would they work for the government that is kidnapping and like just terrorizing our communities? And one is about financial success. One is about lack of understanding the systems that they're working for. Another one is about being part of vulnerable communities and they're specifically being targeted. But there's another piece that's like the theological connection. Will you connect the dots for us around like how could somebody who comes from an immigrant family be consider themselves a Christian and participate in what's happening in this domestic warfare against our own communities?
Yeah. And, I said that there's no political education. I want to correct myself. There's a lot of political education,
Mm-hmm.
like in the way that we're taught in evangelical churches. It's the politics is, I think I froze. Okay. The politics is just conservative politics, white supremacist politics. And so
Yeah.
I think kind of like what I was talking about, the project of cults and white supremacy is to destroy the sense of self. And part of that is cutting off access to community ties. And so I think a lot of these ICE agents, they don't consider themselves part of the community, a community at all. They consider
Mm.
themselves individual. There's like
Individual.
intense, individual, and that's also evangelicalism, right? Like individual salvation. And so
Yep.
this
Individual
individualism, like
sin, not
individual sin,
not societal level sin, individual sin.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And so they don't, I think for a lot of these people, they would say that's not their community. I'm not
Mm.
vulnerable. And so, and they're cut off from their ancestors too.
Yes.
And like
Talk
ancestral
about that.
practices.
Yes.
Because trauma,
Yep.
trauma and, family trauma, societal trauma. And a lot of folks aren't giving language,
Yep.
therapy, space to talk about these things. And so I think theologically, with the infusion of American exceptionalism,
Yep.
infusing of American patriotism in our churches, it makes sense that so many people sign up for Border Patrol, for ICE,
Yeah.
for the Air Force, for the
Yep.
Marines, what have you, because like the best thing you can do in like those positions is their God is one of power and dominion
Mm-hmm.
and conquering God. And
Yes.
so that to them is almost also their fulfillment of their gender role. And with that mixed with being cut off from your people, not even knowing who your people are, or not even like identifying with your people, I mean, I think that's why we are in this place.
Yeah. And it's so surprising to me and ironic and heartbreaking and all of the things mixed into one mush, where we see so many people now who voted for the orange dude and then are like, but I didn't think he meant me or my partner or my kid or my mother. And it's like, what happens in our lack of connecting the dots, like our intentional silencing of those parts that help us understand ourselves as interdependent, that made you believe that this wasn't going to impact you. And then there's this really heartbreaking piece around realizing that you are vulnerable. You are one of them that you even yourself are talking
Yep.
about. And I don't know my hope is that we as a community can be open enough and soft-hearted enough to receive so many folks who are going to be in that process of connecting new dots or being surprised, heartbroken, hurt, realizing that they are not white or that they're never going to be seen as white, that they are part of the them that they are talking against or voting against or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if I have that softness, but my best version does. I don't know if this version does, but my best
Yeah.
version does.
Yes. My Christianity has its limits. I think I hear you, and I think that there should be softness and care. Is it going to come from me individually? I don't know if that's my particular ministry. I'm sure it's somebody's. But I think for me that patience has run out, and it ran out a long time ago. Around November 2016.
Yep.
I can pinpoint because I brought I think that was the work of like most of my 20s, is trying to bring people along, and just
Yeah.
being so exhausted. I'm like, I can't, all my
Yeah.
energy is going to this. I can't, I
Yeah.
need to save myself. I need to
Yes.
take care of myself. And so I think for some people that's their ministry, and God bless them
Yes.
forever. But for me at this point, that's not where I'm at. But I do think that there should be entry points always, like we said, like it's a lifelong process for us. Some folks it takes longer to get to political racial consciousness. There's different triggers that happen for folks that helps them get them there, and I'm glad they're here. Um, but it's like it goes back to American individualism, like, oh, you don't care
Yes.
until it personally affected you. Like
Yes.
that's really bad. Like you have no empathy, no compassion,
Yes.
and it's hard, and I think that's when I struggle with being a Christian, because I should have, maybe not should, but like I would like the idea of having endless compassion. But it's really hard,
Yeah.
because this man has shown who he is for over a decade. So it's
Yeah.
confusing to me that folks wouldn't get that. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of stick with this passage in the Bible where, Jesus says, Father, forgive them. And we always focus on the for they know not what they do part, but I really feel very comforted by this is not my first original thought. I learned it from other theologians and faith people of like, Jesus said, God, you do it because I'm done with these people. Like, I just don't have it in me to
Period.
do it. So that really
Period.
comforts me to be like, I can give that to God. God, can you please,
Yes.
um, can you please help out on this one? I do
Yeah.
want to just touch another touch around Zionism because you've talked about it a couple of times. I think it's really, really, really important in our communities to talk about. And I feel like it's harder to talk about, or I see it being talked about less in our communities of color. And I'm wondering if you were saying like it doesn't make sense. I think it doesn't make sense still to me now a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like I had to do a lot of rereading, relearning because I had this it felt like innate, like default to yes, Israel as a state should exist and Jews should own it and they should be able to protect themselves. And these narratives that just like nobody had actually said to me out loud, but were so clear that I am embarrassed to say that it took me like reconnecting with my own humanity and empathy to be like, I actually don't give a shit what is happening, this, like what that theology is or what people deserve or don't. Human beings deserve to live, children deserve to live, people deserve sovereignty over the place where they live and reside. And so I would love it if you would help, especially folks who maybe are hearing about like free Palestine or hearing words like genocide and feeling like those are big words and those are scary words, and maybe have a sense of like, but Zion is this holy place and Jerusalem belongs to the Jews, and like, will you help tease out a little bit? I think there's a piece around what a government state is that is really important as compared to a
Hmm.
people. And but any of the dots that you can connect for folks who are part of like our community, who are like, I don't know much about what's happening on the other side of the world because we stick to these continents pretty much. But how
Hmm.
that connects to religion and the colonizing white supremacist culture. How did you learn
Yeah,
about that?
yeah. Yeah, so I want to speak to what you said about how like you kind of just like believe these things and not sure where they come from.
Yeah.
I think, and I mean, it might sound kind of like a joke, but I think I'm being sincere. Like, I think a lot of it comes from Left Behind. Like the
You're
movies, the books,
kidding.
those, like,
I
they were
totally grew up on
huge.
those. Yes.
They were
Yes.
huge. And what was they were, I mean, it's eschatology, it's like the end times, right?
Yes.
And like some of like the most, I mean, to me, images that would stand out in my brain are like the two witnesses in Israel that need to get killed for the
Mm.
Antichrist, and it's just
Yes.
like, it's this whole thing. And I think a
Wow.
lot of like, I think it's kind of like in the back of a lot of like our head, like people who grew up in the evangelical church, kind of in the back of
Yeah.
your head. But there is this belief of like, oh yeah, Israel needs to be a state,
Yeah.
um, which makes no sense biblically. When I think, and I heard this from a rabbi who was protesting Israel. He said how Jewish people are inherently nomadic, and that was like one of
Yes.
the big lessons that God was teaching them is their deep desire for political power, for a state is didn't really matter. And so and I think with the state of Israel, which has been in existence since 1949, I mean, it's
Not
within
2,000
our
years.
no, not at all. It's literally just, I mean, we have grandparents that age.
Yes.
We have grandparents older than the state of Israel. And so it is a classic tale of settler colonialism. It
Yeah.
is, it's colonialism draped in religion, draped in a particular religion. It was after World War II, and the Western powers, particularly the United States, wanted power in that part of the world. Similar
Yes.
to what's happened in Iraq and 25 years ago. It is always like the inventions of rapture, like the inventions of hell. It comes back to land, power, and money. And so
Yeah.
we can connect these dots with there would be no genocide in Palestine if it wasn't for American dollars. And why? And
Yes.
and what is America's like? They don't care about no other country, like their safety, their freedom. Like they care about power and it's a land grab, it's a money grab, and the October 7th of it all is clearly just an excuse to have this ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And we are reminded that Jesus was Palestinian, that
Mm-hmm.
Palestine was a mix of folks from different beliefs, different cultures. It has been settled, colonized by different empires and entities for millennia.
Yes.
So that's something to remember. And I mean, Jesus himself was also not particularly worried about political overthrows.
Yeah.
It was quite the opposite, actually. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think we're seeing that like American exceptionalism, patriarchy, like just violent male patriarchy, um, really drive some of like the schools of belief that have to be in place for this genocide to be happening.
Yeah. It was really helpful for me that there are so many Jews like Jews for Justice and other Jewish groups who are at the front of this like call of naming it genocide, of like saying we can be for Jewish people without being for the state of Israel, of
Yes.
teaching us about, the creation of the state of Israel was in and of itself anti-Semitic, because a lot of other countries were like, we don't want all these refugees, and that, like Jewish
Hmm.
refugees specifically. And so those, I feel so grateful for our like brothers and sisters and siblings in Jewish activist communities who are doing so much lifting and labor. Of course, Palestinians everywhere doing all that they can. But I think it was helpful also to disconnect Zion as a concept, as a like, even eschatological, like this end times kind of concept of like, this is our home, from a physical place in the
Yes.
Middle East or the ancient Near East, if we're talking about the Bible, that I don't know anything about, that I'm not a part of. And that connecting the like the myth and the fantasy and the fairy tale from real live human beings in a real
Yep.
place on the planet, I think is one of the strategies that helped me most like dislodge that notion that was embedded somewhere that I couldn't even identify. And you blew my mind a little bit with that Left Behind series. Um, I'm wondering if it feels like the end times for you now. Like, I'm like, this feels like the apocalypse, or eschatology feels like it is right here. And I hear that
Yeah.
a lot. And I'm curious, as somebody who was like into that, studied it, looked at those things, what's this moment feeling like for you? Does it feel like that? Did you debunk some of that stuff and you're like, that is connected to myth? And tell us, is it the end of the world? Like, how are you
Yeah.
feeling?
Bef Before I answer that, because I
Yeah.
have so many thoughts about that, I want to go back to about the state of Israel, just
Okay.
to wrap that up.
Yep.
I also think as Christians, we need to divest from states at all. The state of
Mm.
Israel, the state of the United States, the state of
Yes.
Mexico. I am
Yes.
an anarchist on most days,
Okay.
and I don't believe in the veneration of any nation
Yes.
at all. I think these systems, all of them, every state are usually like founded by, especially the Western ones, white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy, which have been a death sentence to our people since the beginning of all of those ideals. So I also like invite Christians to really problematize and think about their relationships to citizenship, to the state, the country. Because even I've seen like, folks like, and I think, I don't really judge folks. Bring the Mexican flags to the protests. It's like, yeah, but that state's not going to save us either.
Mm.
Looking at Mexican history, it's not the best either. Especially the
That's
ways that our
very
people have sold out to West. Sorry, go ahead.
That's very Christian of you, actually. Like, that's very
Yes, it
Christian of
is.
you.
Yes, it is.
To be like, we owe our citizenship to God, to a higher authority. We do
I know that's
not
right.
belong to any
Yes,
nation. I'm like, that sounds
that's
very
right.
Christian.
It is. It is. And to each other,
Yes.
our loyalty, our allegiance to one another as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just needed to say
Please.
that bit.
Absolutely.
And so the end times, I think we've experienced the end times many times. The world has
Mm-hmm.
ended in a million different ways for a million different people. We're
Yes.
experiencing the end times right now in Palestine.
Yes.
We experience the end times in uh, the Nakba, in 1949. We've experienced the end times with Jim Crow here, with
Yep.
the rise of slavery here, with the rise of the United States here, going back to the state of it all.
Yep.
And so there's this poem by Nayera Wahid that I actually painted on a canvas, and it's hanging in my house. And it
Mm.
says, "I don't pay attention to the world ending. It has ended for me many times. It began again in the morning." I
Mm.
think for those of us who have studied eschatology, is we're also then students of resurrection.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that keeps me with my identity as a Christian, because I so much believe in resurrection. And resurrection can mean all kinds of things. I think we are also co-creators in resurrection. We're co-creators in new worlds. And as much as we see empire falling, empire rising, we are always in co-creation of creating something new, something better, something for our people, for our own salvation. So yes, the world is ending. It has ended before, and a new one will begin again.
Yes. Oh, yes, that gives me chills. I have one more question before we get to the final question, which is, I wonder what home is for you. What feels like home? Where feels like home? Who feels like home? Which connects to our last question, which is about ancestors. So you can answer that however you want, but I'm curious. Home when we live in diaspora is a very complicated conversation, and I'm curious what feels alive for you in that question.
Yeah, I think about my physical location. Like I said, I'm from the Bay Area. I'm from Oakland specifically, and Oakland has quite the reputation in the rest of the world. And I think we have so much character and grit, and it's the home of so many political movements, so many incredible political leaders. And so home to me is not only Oakland, but also just I have such an amazing community here. I have such an amazing group of friends, queer friends from all over with many different identities. And my family, I live with my partner. My brother lives 15 minutes away. My mom lives half an hour north, and they're all home to me. They make up so much of my hope, my inspiration, my will to get through shitty days. And they are my good news.
Amen. Amen. So then your cloud of witnesses, where is that fount of resilience and resistance when you need to be reminded who you are and you are having those shitty days? Like, who are in those cloud of witnesses? Be they ancestors, you've already talked about your chosen and your family close to you. Who else is in that, whether they be thinkers or theologians or cultural icons or family members? Who else do you put in that?
So I have kind of like these like silhouette ancestors that I think of that kind of look like my mom. My mom doesn't know her bio family. My dad's family, I haven't talked to my dad in over a decade, and we were never really that close. So I don't really know much about his side. But I know that I come from a lineage of fighters because I'm a fighter and so is my mama. So they had to have been fighters too. So I think of them and I feel them. I don't know who they are. I don't know what their names are, but I know them.
Yes.
So I think of them. And then my queer ancestors. I just finished Tourmaline's book on Marsha P. Johnson, and I think of Sylvia Rivera. I think of Gloria Anzaldúa. I think of all the amazing Black and brown, queer ancestors that we've had, and all queer ancestors really that we've had. And it's especially right now. I was just telling you about this book, Faggots and Their Friends Between Revolutions, and it was written in 1977 by Larry Mitchell. And it's been such a balm to my heart, especially with everything going on right now. And it also goes back to the idea that the world's always been ending. And that there is solace and with one another and with our ancestors. So those are my cloud of witnesses. And then like my current realities with my family, my chosen family, my bio family, my amazing nibblings. They're so smart. And my two wonderful dogs. So those are my people. That's where I come from. That's why I'm still here.
We are so grateful that you are still here. And I just want to say thank you so much. Muchas gracias. I have wanted you on, like I had said, I wanted you on an episode of Teología sin Vergüenza forever. We finally made it happen. I'm so grateful for your time and for your light and your love. Thank you for being you in the world. And thank you for spending some time with us.
Thank you so much. It was such a joy to be here. And it's always a joy to talk to you, friend. So thanks for having me.
Gracias por escucharnos. Síguenos en las redes sociales @teosinvergüenza y únete a nuestra lista de difusión en WhatsApp.
Comparte tus ideas y tus historias con nuestra comunidad en Facebook o Instagram usando el hashtag Las Sinvergüenzas.
Comparte este episodio con alguien a quien amas y danos 5 estrellas en la plataforma donde escuchas este podcast.
Y pendiente a nuestro próximo episodio para que conozcas a otra teóloga sin vergüenza de ser activista.
Somos las Sinvergüenzas.
¿Eres tú uno de nosotros?
¡Sí!